Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my LinkedIn Lives with my favorite experts who help women earn more and live better. And today we have Dr. Robyne Hanley-Dafoe. Before we get into her, I should probably introduce myself a little bit more. Claire Wasserman here, founder and author of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform, global community, and book. And I've been tooling around with a new way to describe what we do, which I think is really a support system to help women be their best advocates. And that can come through work, can come through money, it can come through life. I mean, it's really all interconnected. And I would say the through line to all of this is actually what Dr. Robyne specializes in, which is resiliency. And in her new book, How to Stress Wisely, so stress wisely, how to be well in an unwell world. One thing I said to her before we jumped on this live was, if you are not well, you cannot do well, right? It's always that foundation of self before we can get into the work that we do and the money we make. So everything's interconnected. Quick background on Dr. Robyne. She is a multi-award-winning education and psychology instructor, author, and resiliency expert. She has been a TEDx speaker. She's all about relatable, accessible materials. And she has this new book, like I mentioned, Stress Wisely, How to Be Well in an Unwell World. Our focus for today is going to be, and this is in her words, so I'd love for her to tell me exactly how to do this, making stress your ally in 2024. Usually it's something, or many of us think it's something we must banish, but no, we're going to make it our ally today. So Robyne, Dr. Robyne, thank you so much for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here, Claire. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So maybe we can get into a little bit of your background, how you came to this work. Oftentimes when I interview folks who specialize in a certain area, it's because they themselves were struggling with that area of focus. And then in trying to solve their own problems, became an expert so they could help others. Curious, was that your path at all?
There definitely is some similarities there. Yes. So I would say the work that I originally started doing with resiliency very much was inspired by my own comeback journey, my own experience of going from, a high school dropout who struggled with addictions, all of a sudden to a university professor who now specializes in human resiliency. So that part of my work very much was paving the path that I had to walk to get myself into a place of recovery and to be able to support myself and my family and all the things that look like. The latest work that we're doing here around Stress Wisely was really coming from this origin story of recognizing that there was this really big misunderstanding about stress. And even in your opening remarks, that idea about we're supposed to get rid of stress. And as somebody who studies, psychology and physiology, I got a wee bit concerned, Claire, that we were kind of working against ourselves, given that stress is essentially inherent to the human condition. And it's actually how we perform at our best when we're able to stay working within this reasonable cycle of a stress zone. And we can talk a wee bit more about that as our time together continues.
Well, let's go into it. Yeah. What's a reasonable cycle of a stress zone? I'm taking notes.
Yeah, for sure. So again, just to think about our nervous system, which is very interconnected with our stress system, it's meant to keep us alive. It is meant to let us know what is important. It lets us find motivation. It helps us find discipline. It keeps us able to function in a really busy, noisy world. So our stress system is so important. And often what a lot of folks are doing are trying to find ways to disconnect from it or to get rid of it, trying to live stress-free versus understanding that if we can understand how our biology works and understand what is this optimal range where I'm challenged and I'm I have motivation to get it done, but not going to that place of overwhelm is the key. And one of the big keys that we talk about in Stress Wisely, how do we find this sweet spot between being a high performer and a doer and an achiever without crossing this threshold into that place where we feel overwhelmed and we get burned out?
So I would say that probably comes down to staying connected to yourself, right? So not waiting until there's an extreme signal like burnout or depression, exhaustion to wake you up, but being able more proactively to see smaller signals. But tell me, am I right in that?
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. So one of the things we talk about is that we always know that a proactive approach to anything about our well-being is going to serve us very well. So we often talk about this kind of idea there's like a 5% investment in our proactive practices versus what we often talk about is a 300% investment in recovery and repair. So if we can do things in advance, if we can essentially we talk about like cope ahead of time, right? So if you're going into a situation, a difficult conversation or a difficult encounter that you know is going to be difficult, instead of trying to like recover after, Claire, a lot of these ideas about taking a proactive approach. So that way we ensure that we are as okay as possible before we go into it and already have things set up afterwards. So that way we're able to mitigate some of the negative effects of some of those interactions.
Okay. Now I know that how about you just, I was about to like jump right into the book because I know you have a number of tenants. I think there's 8 in it,
Yes.
but tell me maybe just what is the book? What do you cover?
So we in the book we cover the 8 realms of wellness. So one of the things that we learned early in our research is that you can have somebody who is like at peak performance in physical health, right? So I've had a chance to chat with like Olympians, right? These are absolute fine-tuned physical machines and they're not well. Like emotionally they're not okay. Or on the other side I can work with corporate CEOs and some of the largest organizations in the world and they have all of the resources and occupational safety that you can imagine and they're not well. So we got really curious about, okay, like how can we be in these extreme categories of greatness and excellence, yet these people are not okay? So what my team and I were able to uncover and what we took a deep dive into is to see how these 8 realms work in this interconnected pattern to connect us to this place where we can have genuine, authentic wellness across our lifespan, as opposed to having certain areas in which we're excelling and what we can do to make it more possible in a sustainable, practical way.
Not to make you give away the book, but if we could go into maybe what these 8 realms are and
Yeah,
maybe a tip for each or a
totally.
story that that stood out to you in your research.
Yeah.
I guess
Okay.
is the first one physical?
Yeah, Claire, I love this. Okay, so this is one of the probably, I'll give you some of my favorite insights that I learned along the way and a little tool to go with it. First one, the biggest one we learned about physical. Number one is you can pass a physical health exam with a broken heart. So it's
Wow.
this idea that like the physical is so important, yet it is not the end all be all. Another big takeaway that we learned about it for any person who has ever struggled with a diet, who has ever struggled with like an eating plan or a diet, one of the things that we actually learned, the recommended calories for women, this will blow people's mind, I think. The recommended calories for women, which in North America is often talked about 800 or 1800 calories a day, that was first introduced after the wars when they were trying to slow down the suffragette movement. So women were
Well,
getting all of these rights and all of this power. And then a group of men said, how do we slow women down? And they say, you know what? If they have only 1800 calories a day, they will be too weak to protest. So, what's wild, Claire, in that learning is that it is still practiced and taught in medical schools, the 1800 calories a day for women. So, even just knowing the origins of where some of these beliefs about our physical health come from is actually really insightful. And so, I often share with folks if you've ever like failed at a diet or ever like not been able to stick to it, like you are part of this movement of like renegades who in your bones, you know that women need more nutrition than that to be able to live healthy and whole and well. So these are some of the big ideas. So how I framed each of these realms, Claire, is we talked about like, what do we know to be true about each of these areas? And like, what is it? Where did this information come from? And what do we do about it? So one of the big kind of takeaways around the physical nutrition, one of the things that we learned, the most optimal way for wellness, especially for women in very busy, full cycles and seasons of their lives. Let's say we're navigating childcare and all that invisible labor of supporting, our elderly parents or whatever that looks like. Walking is actually the most effective form of movement. What we call non-exercise activity thermogenics benefits women's nervous system better than any other type of a workout while women are in a very busy full season of work and play.
I just need to pause on this 1800 calorie a day because
Yes.
this is tripping me up. So I just quickly Googled that. I couldn't find, I mean, I might be putting in the wrong words, but I couldn't find that origin story. How did you, I mean, I'm going to post about this on LinkedIn and tag you because I
Okay.
think other people will be out. I think it's so important to find out the origin, ask why before you accept the advice.
So Claire, the best
Talk
resource, so the best, I would say the most collective, robust summary that explains diet culture, is actually the book. Just wait, it's on my shelf. It's called the book Anti-Diet, and the
okay.
author. If you just Google anti-diet, the author very early on in her writing, she does this amazing summary of the kind of the chronology of calories and what that looks like. So if you want a place where you have all of that information in one stop, I just in my research, we just kind of scratch the surface. But if that's an area your listeners want to take a deeper dive into, diet, that book, the Anti-Diet, is an amazing resource.
Great. And I think the author is Christy Harrison.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I see somebody posted, like, yeah, she goes, Paulina goes, that is incredible. The $1,800 or the 1,800 calories per day recommendation is meant to undermine women. Claire, your mouth was open for so long on this one. Yes. Well, you know why? Not to derail this conversation, but a big origin story of ladies get paid. People think it's the wage gap, which technically, yes, in terms of like focus for the business, but it really was me realizing the energy and time that I had spent caring about my body and weight and thinking, and that then goes, well, how many other ways have I been spending, wasting time and energy on things that don't ultimately serve me? Then it was the money stuff and it was self-advocacy and, but it came, the spark was actually about body and food.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. And perhaps I shouldn't be as surprised as I was to find that out then. For the 8 tenets, by the way, so for everybody, they're physical, emotional, intellectual, social, environmental, occupational, financial, and spiritual. We're going to go, we did physical, so I guess next one will be emotional. But how did you come up with these 8 tenets? Did you have a sense of what it was going into this book, or did they emerge from the research?
Yeah, amazing question, Claire. So one of the forms of research that I do is called action research, which is also sometimes called just-in-time research. So this is something where versus like more traditional research, where it's like you have an idea or a hypothesis at the onset, then we set out to either, prove or support or not support the hypothesis. How I've structured my work is like, again, it's field testing. It's going out, talking to people, thousands and thousands of people all around the world in different life circumstances. And what we do is we cluster and pull out themes. So the 8 of them were these things that we found that when people spend just a wee bit of attention and like awareness in those 8 realms, those were the persons that were able to demonstrate the most resiliency, but also overall well-being. So it's, again, just-in-time research that we use in an action research model. And this has been replicated. And it's also something that really lends and brushes up really nicely against a lot of other multifaceted wellness realms or models, I could say. So for example, the World Health Organization, when we look at social determinants of health, these are all areas that we usually want to make sure that we have dialed in.
Okay, awesome.
Okay,
so take us through the next one. Yeah.
Okay, emotion. So again, I'll give you the emotion one is, first of all, it's kind of recognizing that our feelings are data. They're emotions. And so often, especially in our culture, this idea that like intellect is more important than our feelings. And what we actually discovered is that when people were more in attunement with their emotional landscape, their emotional health, it actually served their overall well-being in a pretty significant way. So often we think about our emotions, that the feelings, that they're just like nuisances, they're irritants, they get in the way. We want to feel certain things and we don't want to feel other things. So one of the things that we really wanted to shine light on is how important emotional health is to the overall picture of well-being. Here's a quick takeaway for you. I have 3 teenagers, 19, 17, and 15. One of my favorite little examples of like being able to show up in that emotional well-being place is a wee while ago, I was chatting with my boys. So Hunter's 19, my littlest is 15. And then all of a sudden their sister came home. And if you've ever seen a 17-year-old girl in the wild with a mood, you know what I'm talking about. She came home all keyed up. And I turned to the boys, Claire, to suggest that they give their sister some space. But the boys were already gone, right? They already took off. So then I asked Ava, okay, like what's going on? And in this moment, do you need comfort or do you need
Mm.
solutions?
Uh-huh.
And she said, in this moment, mom, she said, I actually need you to hate math as much as I do. So that
Ah,
was code for she wanted some comfort. So in that
yes.
moment, instead of trying to offer her solutions, trying to get to the bottom of it or tell her how important math is to her overall development and, and her future success, it was just to be able to show up, and she just wanted somebody to like vent about how math wasn't going well for her that day. And so often, especially as high performing women, I think there's this tendency that we're fixers. So as soon
Mhm.
as somebody says like, hey, I'm having, math isn't going great, we're like, okay, well, we'll get you a tutor. We're going to figure this out. We'll dive, try and find a way to mitigate this versus she just needed comfort in that moment. Because one of the things we learned about emotional wellness, we feel overwhelmed when we feel alone in a big feeling. We feel
Mm.
overwhelmed when we feel alone. So as long as we can send that cue to the people that we love the most, that they're not alone and we'll sit with them, it can do wonders for their emotional health.
Which also means if you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps the thing to do is to seek out others. Although, what
Yeah.
happens if your initial instinct is you kind of just want to crawl under the covers and self isolate?
Yeah. So again, anytime we try to pull back, it usually is because we have people who try to recover on their own. The chances are, and what we often see psychology tells us, is when they were little, they had to probably manage a lot of their big emotions when by themselves. So it's a behavior that we might want to explore unlearning, because we know in the grand scheme of things, it does hold us back from actually being able to have really great connection. And we know connection is such a key component to our resiliency, that sense of belonging, knowing we are not alone. So if you notice your tendency is when you're dealing with big things that you just want to retreat, and as you said, kind of, just kind of avoid persons, figure it out by yourself. The reality is our hands weren't meant to carry the weight of the world by ourselves. Like, we need to be in community. And chances are when you were little, you might have had to do it all by yourself. So again, unlearning, just putting some light and lots of tenderness and compassion around that part of you that feels like you have to do this by yourself.
Did you see during the pandemic a greater need for your work because of that isolation?
Like, oh my goodness, yes. One of the things that we started doing, I think, as a society, is we started to talk about emotional health in a very different way. It became top of mind for everybody in one way or another. And I would say probably one of the biggest kind of takeaways that we've learned from the last 3 years of a global health pandemic is that loneliness will kill you faster than a bad diet. And
Yeah.
right now, the real issue is the deep levels of loneliness. And one of the things that's really fascinating about loneliness is, before we used to think it was predominantly the elder population. It was like senior citizens, those are the lonely ones. Well, I think they found pickleball and they're doing really well right now for the most part. The group that we're seeing with the highest loneliness scores are 18 to 35. The
Yeah.
group that grew up with an ecosystem of social media that said that they're more connected, but social media is like just this, like, just a trick of social comparison, right? It's
Yeah.
not real community and belonging unless it's done with the right intention. And for most of our adolescents who grew up with it, we're seeing the effects of a very lonely, isolated group of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I fully agree. I know we only have 10 minutes left. So we
No
got
worries.
intellectual, social, environmental,
Yeah.
occupational, financial, spiritual. Y'all, if this isn't telling you you need to purchase Dr. Robbins' book, I don't know what is. And yes, she'll be putting the links in directly underneath this recording in the Ladies Get Paid LinkedIn page. But for intellectual, I know you had mentioned it earlier as uh, sort of a secondary, right?
Mhm.
Like key into the feelings first.
Yeah.
But it is your third one in a list of
Yeah.
8 tenants.
Yeah, and again, what's really interesting is if we think about it more as like a circle, that it's not like a hierarchy, it's more that all of these things kind of braiding and working together. Now, one of the
Okay.
things that we discovered with the intellect, and one of the greatest kind of assets to help us understand how intellect impacts our well-being, is first just recognizing the difference between our brain and our mind. So our brain, that physiological system, it needs sleep. It needs an opportunity to get good sleep so it can wash its brain, it can clean itself to be ready for the next day. The mind, it needs a soft place for our thoughts to be able to land. So how we organize information, how we make sure that we are like being aware of our inner dialogue. And I'll give you an example. When I'm working, especially with women high performers, we have this kind of point where, when something happens at that point, at that intersection, even just to notice, the way I talk to myself. Am I talking to myself as a critic or a coach? right?
Right.
So when you screw up or you're like, oh my gosh, let me remind you of everything you've ever done in the history of your life that is wrong. Or that critic versus the coach who's like, okay, let's just take a minute, take a sip of water, take a deep breath, regroup. This is one thing that happened. What's your next right move? So
Yeah.
even understanding our thought patterns, which are connected to the mind, is a huge
Mhm.
part of the intellectual realm, but also not negating the importance of the brain, which is then that physiological realm. And those brains, my gosh, do they ever need some good sleep? Because I think the vast majority of people are experiencing a lot of emotional unrest because we are so overworked and underrested.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and if anybody is having a moment of like panic, crisis, whatever it is, just that halt, hungry, or am I hungry, anxious or angry, lonely or tired?
Yeah.
And it's not to give you an out per se, but just know what capacity you're working with, and maybe hopefully that helps you be a little bit more compassionate to yourself. Um, for social,
Mhm.
I mean, I know we talked about loneliness, but how do you define social as this?
Yeah.
And I've been calling it a tenant, but it's a tenant of what? Of how to stress wisely?
Yeah. So what again, absolutely. So what we see is this interconnectedness of these different of these realms of like knowing that if we can put a little bit of tender care in those areas, we know it's going to make a big difference. And yes, when we talk about social, it's all about the company we keep, including ourself. The longest relationship we'll ever have is our relationship with self. So when we think about social, it actually starts at self and then it goes out into the world. That kind of inner circle, that home team idea. We often talk about making sure in that professional role to have also like maybe your dream team, which my friend Dr. Greg Wells talks about all the time about like who are the people you're surrounding yourself with that are going to elevate you, hold you accountable. And then that next layer of social we talk a lot about is that idea of a brain trust. And again, Dr. Greg does a great job explaining like brain trust. So Claire, where do people go for information to be able to be listening to the right things, being inspired, being part of community like this, a community of practice of persons looking to level up, right? So that social is you within those different types of systems and how we make sure to look after them and recognizing at different times and seasons in their lives, it's going to look really different. And that's okay. But it's recognizing that we're not meant to do this alone.
Yep. Yep. 1,000%.
Mhm.
Environmental.
Yeah. So this one is kind of cool because on one end, it's literally like global warming, health crisis, the planet we live in, and just understanding if our world is on fire, we cannot possibly well, all the way to the impact of what your workspace looks like in your immediate environment. So this is one is very much on a continuum. They all are on a continuum to a degree. And what we see, for example, in the research and what psychology shows us, let's say your place is cluttered. There's lots of stuff around that actually leads to this like emotional clutter and even this intellectual clutter. And so even ensuring that our spaces are like kind of in place or to a degree of order actually can help people and their well-being. In the chapter there in the book we often talk about how even just like our brains need to see water, how we respond when we are in the presence of water, even seeing pictures of water to kind of break up and interrupt that so often our environments are set with these 90-degree angles, which we know creates these deep trenches in our brain. And we have to kind of shake things up a wee bit. So our environments, the colors, the things around us make a huge difference. And there was actually interesting research we did where we had teachers, elementary school teachers, who after their day of work, half of the group went out for a brisk walk, 30 minutes brisk walk to kind of wipe off and shake off the day. The other half of the group spent 15 minutes cleaning their desk and then 15 minutes of a shorter walk. So we had one group was 30 minutes just a walk. The other group was clean your desk 15 minutes and then 15 minutes of a walk. And what was so remarkable, the rates of stress were dramatically decreased for the groups that actually reset their desks
Yeah.
before and not just going out for the walk. Because the group that went out for 30 minutes, yes, they felt better. Soon as they sat down though, Claire, their stress levels spiked again. So again, just understanding a wee bit of the order that sometimes putting our environment in place in a way that isn't too extreme, right? We're trying to be present, not perfect,
Yep.
in a way that's manageable can actually help with our well-being too.
Love it. And there's research also that shows that apparently looking at a picture of nature can
Yeah.
bring you I don't know if it's just as much benefit as being in nature, but a lot more benefit than you might be giving it credit. So don't wait to go on vacation to feel good. Like, integrate elements of that vacation maybe into your daily life if you can. Now you're getting into my realm, which is
Yeah.
occupational, and then of course financial.
Yeah.
Couple of tips there for us.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we learned is if we don't have allyship in the workplace, like if we don't actually have friends or people around us, we can have like a really amazing job, but if we're doing it without that sense of community, we know that it's usually going to have a negative impact on our well-being. So we often kind of joke about this idea that we spend, and we see this in the research, we spend more time awake with our colleagues and our clients than we do with our own family systems.
Yeah.
So the work we do, that idea about purpose-filledness, that meaning making, that is so important. But on the flip side too, I think it's important to recognize that not every piece of work is going to be this like deeply rooted humanitarian type work. So even just a simple strategy that I share with my teenagers is that, you know what, some jobs you're either earning or learning. Right. So this is like you're earning it because you got to go to university next year, or you're learning something that you otherwise aren't going to be able to learn on YouTube or learn in a different platform. So there's seasons when it's learning and like it's learning or earning, right? And that's okay. And that doesn't mitigate the fact that like your wellness is part of it. The big takeaway that we did learn about emotional health in terms of how it relates to occupational and financial was the idea that if we have and can maintain our work having a noble pursuit,
Okay.
work having a noble pursuit, it was the greatest offering or hedge of protection to prevent burnout. So I'll give you an example. So we talked to, for example, women who had multiple jobs, but they had multiple jobs to be able to support their family. And because the noble pursuit was supporting their family, it actually offered a hedge of protection versus somebody having these multiple jobs where they didn't see like that value out of what they were doing. But this was looking after their baby. So you know what? Didn't matter how many hours, it's their kids. They're going to show up for them. So again, knowing the importance of the noble pursuit for the person was a really big takeaway.
Is that the same thing as knowing your impact, being able to see your impact?
It could be. Yeah, it's definitely related. So, unfortunately, so often the work that we do we don't get to see the impact in real time, which makes it a bit harder for it to be a reinforcer.
Yeah.
So like I can give you an example. So I live in Canada. We just got a big snowstorm. And just this morning, I was out on my morning walk. I hike my dogs every morning. It's one of my favorite kind of ways to just ground myself to get ready for the day. As I was walking and I was looking at the snow, I remembered, and this memory was like such an old memory, that I had been out as a single mom at this time in my life. And I had these little babies in snowsuits and I was shoveling the driveway by myself. Right. So I was trying to keep the kids safe on the front step. I'm shoveling this driveway. And then all of a sudden, this gentleman, no idea who he was, he had a snowplow company. And he literally saw what I was doing. He was cleaning out some other people's houses. I wasn't part of his service. And he like literally pulled into my driveway and he's like, "Hey, just get your kids out of the way. I got this." And he
Okay.
cleaned the end of my driveway. And I went to pay him to thank him. And he said, "Hey, helping out a single mom, I'm good." And he goes, "I was raised by a single mom."
Yeah.
So the reason I share that, again, first of all, it was an impact years ago for me. But the fact that he showed up for me in that moment, and when I offered him payment, he's like, "I was raised by a single mom. Like, I got you." Like, that was, my gosh, 18 years ago, right?
Mhm.
17 years ago, and I still remember it, right? Like, that still had impact. So impact can be measured in so many different ways, as can something like success, right?
Yeah.
Success can be measured in so many different ways.
So true. And for Carol asking, I missed the beginning. Will there be a recording available? Yes, forever on our LinkedIn and also should be Ladies Get Paid Facebook and YouTube pages. The last two are financial and spiritual. And then we'll close out with you providing, the links for how people can find you, follow you, and most importantly, pay you.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So the financial, as we know this, and you are the expert in this realm, it's part of our well-being, being able to support ourselves, support our needs, being able to support our loved ones. It's so important to our overall sense of who we are, what we do. And there's just a one little kind of pause on this one. There is no shame in women being successful. And I think there's this tendency that we kind of, we're not really sure what to do with our greatness at times. And again, there's lots of research that talks about tall poppy syndrome and, the idea of like lots of different pieces about there. But one of the things that we learned is that being able to be resourceful really helps women experience this deep level of well-being. And one of the ways that we can kind of braid this together is, even let's say you're going through a difficult challenge, is just to remind yourself that you are a well-resourced person. And well-resourced doesn't always just mean financial. It could, but it could also mean like, the people to ask good questions to, where to go for support. So instead of being like, okay, I got this, and the brain's like, really, do you? What do we have to get? Right? Like, just telling ourselves, I got this, doesn't actually like give us that sense of our nervous system feeling supported. But us telling ourselves, you know what, I am well resourced and I'll figure this out. What's my next right decision, whether it be financial, whether it be anything within those realms we see makes a big difference. And the last one, super quick, the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm is this, like, essentially it's the glue that holds all this together. Just understanding our values, this purpose-filled living, meaningfulness, and what are some strategies, especially for persons and what I really wanted to focus on in that chapter, Claire, was for persons who perhaps had like a really challenging relationship with the idea of spirituality, if it's got really complicated by religion and dogma, to be able to help find inroads or trailheads for people who want to engage in spiritual practices for well-being, but perhaps they've experienced some negativity in their own lived experience and really weren't sure where to start. So that chapter specifically is meant for the weary-hearted person, that person who doesn't even know and maybe has been let down by a lot of institutions. So we took a pretty important perspective, I think, about talking about the spiritual realm, but understanding our place in space and braiding that all together creates a really lovely life where people are able to really be well.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. And you're so good for letting me rapid fire all of this at you. Not everybody could handle it as beautifully as you just did. So yeah, for those who caught the end, you better go back to the beginning, because there were so many gems dropped in these tenets of how to stress wisely. Links, find you, follow you, most importantly, pay you. And by the way, everybody, we're going to have Dr. Robyne hop back into the Ladies Get Paid LinkedIn page after this recording, and she's going to post those links as well, and you can connect with her directly.
100%. Thank you so very much, Claire. drrobyne.ca, all the materials there. I'll make sure to put those links in. And thank you so much for allowing me this privilege of being able to spend time in your company. It's been a joy. So thanks.
Awesome. And for everybody watching, ladiesgetpaid.com, Ladies Get Paid on all social channels. Claire Gets Paid on Instagram, and also Claire Wasserman on LinkedIn. We do these LinkedIn Lives regularly, but we also have lots of video courses, including a brand new Earn Better, How to Negotiate Like a Pro, 5.5-hour video course all about getting more money at work. Thank you, Dr. Robyne. Now go get paid. Bye, everybody.